always thought family was supposed to be your safety net. The ones who'd catch you when the world crumbled beneath your feet. I clung to that belief for far too long, even when all the signs screamed otherwise. My name is Natalie, and for 5 years, I poured every ounce of energy I had into building a dream. Well, my parents watched, judged, and finally discarded me when I no longer served a purpose. I didn't just walk away that day. I took everything they never thought I could build. I was 28 when it happened, but the storm had been brewing long before that. Growing up in a middle-class home in Ohio, I was always the quiet achiever. My older brother Tyler, with his big laugh and football trophies, soaked up all the attention. My parents, George and Linda, treated him like the golden boy, while I was the dependable daughter who kept her head down and got things done. They never celebrated my wins. Not when I made valedictorian. Not when I got into college on a full scholarship. Not even when I graduated with a double major in business and graphic design. They just nodded and said, "That's what we expect from you, Natalie." After graduation, I took the leap and moved back into their house. Not because I wanted to, but because I had a vision. I was building a remote design business that would help small local brands create big brand identities. I worked out of the garage, hunched over a secondhand desk beside old toolboxes and gardening gear. I did client calls between meals, coded my first website while they watched TV just outside the thin garage door, and launched my first product line with barely any sleep. They mocked it at first. "You're still doing those artsy things?" My dad asked one morning over burnt toast. "When are you getting a real job?" Mom sighed every time I turned down her suggestions to apply for receptionist roles at her friend S office. But slowly, the numbers started growing. I landed a big contract with a startup in New York, then a packaging deal with an eco skincare brand that doubled my monthly income. I turned that dusty garage into a full-fledged studio with a proper workstation, ring lights, cameras, samples, whiteboards, the whole setup. I hired remote assistants and started mentoring freelance designers through a paid course I designed myself. And suddenly, everything changed. "You should be charging rent now," my mom said one day as I came in from a 14-hour shift. "You've got your little business now, after all." My dad added, "We supported you all this time. It's only fair you pay your dues." I didn't argue. I paid them what they asked, more than what they were charging my brother, who still lived in a basement, unemployed and unbothered. I covered the electricity bill for the whole house, paid for the internet upgrade they couldn't afford, and even bought groceries every other week. And yet, every conversation with them came with a backhanded comment. "Must be nice to play on the computer all day. Real jobs don't happen in garages. Are you sure this is sustainable?" I ignored the snide remarks. I thought I could prove myself if I just kept growing. But then came the day everything fell apart. The pandemic had caused a ripple effect on several clients' budgets. One of my largest clients canceled their contract out of the blue, citing cutbacks. Then Timor paused their projects. Within 3 weeks, I had lost nearly 60% of my income. I had savings, of course, but not enough to float the payroll of my assistants and pay bills and taxes and still survive for long. So I made the tough call. I paused the paid mentorships, let go of my part-time team with severance bonuses, and planned to restructure everything. I told my parents I was going to take a short break to regroup, maybe 3 months max, and would continue to pay for my own essentials. My dad just laughed. "So much for your big dreams, huh?" I swallowed the lump in my throat. "It's just a temporary reset. I still have the business. Just need to reframe and pivot." But 3 days later, I came home from a coffee shop where I was working on rebranding and found a pile of my belongings. In the driveway, the garage was locked. So was the front door. There was a note taped to the side mirror of my car. "Time to grow up. You've been mooching for too long. We need the garage back. Go figure out real life." I stood there for a full minute, stunned. My laptop was missing from the pile. My camera equipment, my LED kit gone. I pounded on the front door, heart racing. My mom opened it half an inch. Don't make a scene, Natalie. It's not the end of the world. You'll land on your feet somewhere. You locked me out, I said, voice cracking. You've locked me out of my workspace. You said you weren't working anymore. That doesn't mean I'm done. I'm rebuilding. My dad's voice echoed from inside. Then rebuild somewhere else. We need the garage. Your brother's turning it into a gym. That was the last straw. Tyler, who hadn't held a job in 4 years, was getting my studio. The one I built with my own money, sweat, and sacrifice. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just turned, got in my car, and drove straight to my friend Kelsey's apartment to town over. She offered me her guest room without hesitation. But I didn't just bring my clothes with me that night. I brought my entire business identity, my plans, my client list, and my rage. They thought they had ended something. What they really did was set it free. I didn't sleep that first night at Kelsey's. I lay awake on the guest bed, staring at the ceiling fan. Every word my parents had said echoing in my head like poison. Leech mooching. Get a real job. Hashtag silent revenge. Hashtag family betrayal. Hashtag toxic parents. She lost her job and expected compassion. Instead, her parents kicked her out and called her a burden. What they didn't know was that the woman they abandoned would rise stronger than ever. This emotional and powerful story of betrayal, resilience, success, and poetic revenge follows a daughter who turned rejection into $1 million comeback. Through quiet strength, sleepless nights, and relentless work, she built a thriving business from nothing, only to walk away from the same people who doubted her. When her parents tried to crawl back into her life, it was too late. Now she owns everything they thought she'd never touch. A full-circle journey of family betrayal, silent revenge, self-worth, and empowerment that will leave you speechless. Betrayal, toxic parents, emotional story, resilience, revenge, comeback, family rejection, success, startup journey, poetic justice, family drama, businesswoman, inspirational, underdog, kicked out, silent revenge, entrepreneur, forgiveness, strength, growth, motivation, rise, humble beginnings, broken family, rebuilding, financial independence, redemption, karma, perseverance, power shift, heartbreak, struggle, rebuilding life, shocking twist, loyalty, mental strength, boundaries, career rebirth, personal power, transformation, empowerment, healing, family betrayal, toxic parents, silent revenge, poetic justice, comeback story, emotional healing, entrepreneur life, revenge story, broken family, daughter power, success against odds, motivation Algery, empowered women, rising strong, reclaim your worth, underdog victory, heartbreak tosses, self-made, resilience wins, powerful women, from zero tarot, emotional transform, cutting toxic D's, inspiration daily, financial freedom, no going back, healing journey, forgive button verb, emotional revenge, shibuilt, boss energy, successive turpin, career glow up, strength insolence, business gain, turn pain into power, family drama, raise above a hate, never settle, own your story. They had gutted me with such ease after I paid their bills for years, upgraded their home Wi-Fi so I could work, bought them groceries, and gave them everything I had because I thought that's what family did. But that night, I realized something important. I was never their daughter in their eyes. I was a utility, useful until I wasn't, and that meant I owed them nothing. By morning, I had a plan. I knew I had to rebuild from scratch. But this time, not in anyone else's garage. I found a co-working space downtown that offered 24/7 access. The rent wasn't cheap, but I had some emergency funds saved. I turned that tiny glass cubicle into my own empire base. I got a refurbished laptop, borrowed camera equipment from an old classmate, and recreated my entire course program from scratch. This time, even better. I started sharing my story online. I didn't name names, but I talked about being kicked out, being underestimated, being a woman in business, rebuilding her life from ground zero. To my surprise, people listened. My small business page blew up with support. Designers, clients, even brand reps reached out. One client who had previously ghosted me offered me a full-time brand contract after reading my blog post about starting again. Within 6 weeks, I was not only back on my feet, I was soaring. My rebranded company, Studio Rebuilt, gained 14,000 followers in a month. I started mentoring again. People loved my From the Ashes story. My course sales tripled. A well-known entrepreneurship podcast invited me to speak. The host, Liam Matz, was so moved by my story. He offered me an investment opportunity for future expansion. And then the most unexpected thing happened. My parents texted me. Dad, hey, need to talk. Can we meet? Mom, we didn't mean for things to go this way. Just come for dinner. I ignored the first two messages. Then came the third. Dad, Tyler's gym plan didn't work out. He quit. Also, about the business setup. You had some files left on the garage computer. We need your help setting it back up. That was the moment something inside me snapped. But in the best way possible. The sheer gall of it. They kicked me out, handed my workspace to my unemployed brother, and now wanted help because he couldn't figure out how to use the software I spent years mastering. I replied with 3 words. Ask your gym. Days later, I got an email. It was from my dad. Formal, short, cold. Natalie, we heard from Aunt Jean that your business is doing well again. We're proud. Truly. If you're interested, we'd like to revisit the idea of letting us partner with you. You could use the garage again if you want. As your father, I'm offering this opportunity. I read it 5 times. Partner with me. After everything, I didn't reply. Instead, I made a better move. Liam, the podcast host who invested in my company, also owned a few commercial buildings around town. Over lunch one day, I pitched him the idea of buying the strip mall where my parents' favorite antique store was located. It also included a nearby property they always admired, an office building 2 blocks from their home. He agreed. 1 month later, I became the new silent co-owner of that strip, and I had my name put subtly on the deed of the office building. Then I made the move that would rewrite everything. I renovated one of the corner spaces in that office building. Bright lighting, floor-to-ceiling windows, new gear, eco-friendly design, everything top tier. That was my new headquarters. I had Studio Rebuilt stenciled in elegant, lettering across the glass front. I hired a receptionist, a photographer, a project manager, and for the finishing touch, I emailed my parents an official business notice. Dear George and Linda, this is to inform you that your former tenant, Natalie Rowe, has opened her headquarters at 150 for Warden Street, the building 2 blocks away from your house. Thank you for your previous support. Studio Rebuilt team. I knew they'd walk by. I knew they'd see my name, my team, my face smiling from the digital signage screen, cycling my course ad on a loop in the window. And sure enough, they did. I was walking back from a client meeting one afternoon when I saw them standing across the street. My mother was frozen in place. My dad's face was unreadable. He looked down, then up, then at the door. He didn't come in, but I smiled because now the door was mine. And this time it locked from the inside. 3 months passed. I didn't reach out. I didn't need to. My business was thriving. I had a team, clients in multiple countries, and a schedule that was finally on my terms. I was running webinars, hosting live Q and AS, and mentoring young women entrepreneurs who reminded me a little too much of myself. Hopeful, overgiving, waiting for scraps of approval from the wrong people. One afternoon, I got a message on LinkedIn. It was from a woman named Valerie Simmons, a corporate HR executive from a media firm. She said her company was planning a mini documentary series called Rebuilt Women, highlighting female entrepreneurs who had overcome family betrayal or adversity to achieve success. She'd heard about me from Liam. She wanted to feature my story. But here was the twist. It would involve revisiting the physical locations of the turning points in my journey, including my former home. I hesitated. Was I ready to go back? But something in me whispered, do it. So I agreed. The camera crew came. The director, Sam, was patient and kind. We filmed scenes at my office, in the co-working space I used to sleep in, and even in the tiny apartment I lived in when I first got kicked out. Then came the day we drove to the suburbs. My parents' house, the house I once paid the electric bills for. I walked up the street with the cameras rolling behind me, heart pounding. I wasn't going to knock, just pass by, speak to the camera about what happened on that sidewalk. How I stood there jobless with my entire life into bags as my father slammed the door behind me. But I didn't get that far because the front door opened and there stood my mom. She froze, then called out, "Natalie," like I was a ghost returning from the grave. Behind her, my dad appeared. His hair had gone grayer. He looked older, like life had dragged him a few miles deeper than he expected. For a moment, I thought he might yell or storm inside or slam the door like before. But instead, he stepped onto the porch. "Natalie," he said slowly, "we saw the signs. We saw your face on the building downtown. That's yours, right?" I nodded. Then he added with an uncomfortable, choking breath, We didn't know what we had. I didn't know what you were building in that garage. We were proud of you. We just didn't say it." I looked at the cameras, then back at him. "Dad, you didn't forget to say it. You chose not to." My mom looked like she might cry. She stepped forward with a shaky voice. "Please, can we talk? Just us. No cameras, please." Sam, the director, nodded and gestured the crew back to the van. I stayed. I had no idea why. Maybe some part of me still wanted to hear them out. Maybe I needed to. We sat on the porch. They poured tea. My father apologized, not with excuses, with actual remorse. He admitted to favoring Tyler because he always seemed like the one who needed more help. Well, I was too strong for your own good. And then my mother, the same woman who once told me, "Your brother will make something of himself. You'll just keep hopping from thing to thing," reached into her purse and pulled out something unexpected. It was a wrinkled, folded up print out of the first article ever written about my business. From homeless to CEO. How one woman rebuilt from a garage. "I printed this," she said. "I read it when it first came out. I keep it in my bag. I just didn't know how to say sorry." That was the moment I felt the full weight of what forgiveness really means. It doesn't mean you go back to how things were. It means you recognize who you've become and refuse to shrink again. I stood up and said, "I appreciate the apology. I do. But I'm not coming back. This porch was once my ending. Now it's just a stop on the way." I turned to leave, but not before adding, "Oh, and if Tyler still needs help, tell him the garage's rent is for $1,000 a month now. Business rates." Their jaws dropped and I walked away smiling. The documentary aired 2 months later. It went viral. The final scene, me unlocking the doors to my headquarters, greeting my all-women staff, and sitting beneath a quote stenciled on the wall in gold. "Build what they said you'd never own. Then let them walk by and watch." And as the credits rolled, I received a message from a young girl on Instagram. "My parents told me I was a burden. Your story made me believe I can still be something. Thank you for showing me I don't have to beg to belong." That's when I knew the story wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to every girl who'd ever been kicked out, cast aside, or called a leech, and turned those words into a launch pad